There's this notion of the black pill. This is the notion that you wake up and that everything is crap, and it's a form of nihilism. Okay. It's the idea that when you really see how things are, you say, there's a philosopher, what's his name? I'll think of his name, but he was partly inspiration for the TV series True Detective, the first season.
Okay.
If you ever saw that.
Yeah.
But he's an antinatalist, and an antinatalist is someone who doesn't believe that human beings should reproduce. We should just die out. And he has a nihilist philosophy in which he sort of sees the human race as like a bacteria. We've infected the planet, and at some point it'll develop the right sort of antibodies and we'll all be gone. Mm-hmm. And so that is sort of a form of the black pill. Sort of like you see things and boom, everything is horrible, and so you have the potential to succumb to nihilism.
Right, got it.
There's also a white pill, and the white pill would be the ability to, that would be religion, or in fact some evangelical folks call it the white pill, that you suddenly see that there's God, and so that there is redemption, or there is something better outside of all this and whatnot. And the point of bringing up any of those sorts of pills is that each of them represent a way of being able to dance and deal with reality. Right. And all of them may have a shortcoming, or they offer some sort of solution. And they have a parallel, I think, in some of the things you and I have been talking about here in terms of how do people engage with themselves and the world in such a way that, I don't want to use the word happy, because that's a pill in of itself. As an aside, there's a famous philosopher, Alain Badiou, and he calls it the happiness industrial complex. Oh, okay. And that part of what drives, if there were a happiness pill, for instance, it comes in the form of, he uses, Zizek talks about this too, of Western Buddhism, that we all need to start buying meditation apps and doing yoga. Don't do yoga.
Don't do it.
But,
no, I got to, though.
There's a couple of jokes in there. I'm not going to go in there.
I know. But it's good that you can hit on it and then go back to the topic.
That's because I woke up at 4 this morning. I'm tired. That's the only reason. But
yes.
So the idea that where was I at with this thing? Oh, it was the yoga or and all this sort of stuff and meditation, and all those are a form of either the black or the blue or the red pill. They could be the blue pill because they allow you to become better consumers, better cogs in the machine of capitalism, without ever really questioning things. Like, for instance, again, why do we need to meditate more? The things that you feel, the fact that you can't sleep, or the fact that you have, you're always anxious, maybe something you need to know as opposed to being numbed from. And the goal would be, how do we engage with ourselves? That would be a wonderful example of that there is an engagement with your own suffering in such a way that may inform you maybe how to change your life, may be able to inform you on how to be able to make the lives of others better. But none of those are the sort of pills that offer a fix that either give you numb you into sleeping or give you a false sense of being awake.
That you just brought up a moment ago,
and
I'm so glad we're not having any of that being aired anywhere.
I think the first podcast should be blackface or not blackface.
Oh, come on.
We'll get some hits. I mean, some little hits.
Part of this is this podcast is probably one of the most dangerous podcasts out there. I'm pretty sure that's a fact, and I'm the one who's in danger. So.
Then we say, is it okay to pick on transgender kids?
Okay.
And the pro and con, and we'll sort of divide up and debate that.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Got Therapy. The Got Therapy podcast has been going on for so long. And
we used to have a video, so technically it was a vidcast.
That's exactly what it
podcast.
was. But we're changing the past as we speak. So get
Changing
ready
the
for
past.
that.
That's called apricot in a Freudian. That there's a Freudian concept for changing the past.
Oh,
and
that
it's
sounds like a topic. Right
apricot.
there.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
All right, so all right, put that on the list of things to get back
Talk
to
about it.
because I think those are kind of interesting topics. Now, at some point, you're moving the headphones over there. We'll probably wear some headphones
like that.
when we do it. So we want to
Like
measure that
something
audio.
that
Now,
cover my face. I've been told I have the I have a face for not radio. I have a face for I don't know.
a helmet. I thought of maybe a reversed helmet in some
That's
way
it,
too,
yeah.
so that we can figure out how to not shock the people who may have a chance to watch this. All right. Well, thanks for being here, man. How are you? What's going on in your world, Dr. Dan Rhodes, ladies and gentlemen?
What's good? It's good. It's I've spent a lot of time straightening my beard.
Okay.
Trying
Well,
to go for.
I remember, I don't know how many minutes out of every podcast we had to devote to your beard.
Yeah, it's an important thing.
And the thing that you put on it, which I never really
That's
understood.
right. I use
Where
a
was this
diamond oil. It's a beard cream. Actually, you mentioned the beard thing because
Yeah.
my son's been having some medical issues and
Oh, sorry to hear
one
it,
of
man.
these things is he's been having lots of stomach aches. So we went to go visit Dr. Ali. Very nice guy, by the way. I don't know if
Okay.
anybody is Dr. Ali. He's good guy.
All right, sounds
But
good.
he noticed that my son is 12, and he said, well, he hasn't started hitting puberty yet.
Right, okay.
And I thought to myself, I hit puberty late, And
Yeah,
so this
I mean, it was
beard-
about last week sometime,
Well,
wasn't it? Or
it's
something
actually-
like that, but I'm not
There's
sure.
such thing as emotional puberty. I'm never going to get there. But, when my
Okay.
son was born 12 years ago, I could not grow a beard. I tried. It was a sort of a mangy kind of thing.
Okay.
And then one day, like about 6 years into it, I just sort of sat down and went, and then suddenly, poof.
Wow.
It's like-
So you had to strain like
Just
that.
strain
That,
and then-
that reminds me of other things, but I don't know
does.
why you would necessarily equate your straining with
Well,
beard
I had to really,
popping out.
I had
on
to
your,
focus, and poof, and then just sort of happened.
All right,
Yeah.
I don't know where to go in the next step in that story right there, but
There really is
your
nowhere.
beard is almost another person on this
It
this
is.
podcast.
If my
sometimes.
beard could talk.
If your beard could talk, that is wrong in so many ways.
It is.
All right, so
Smells
yeah,
like a
so
fish can, too, by the way.
how's your son? I mean, he's okay. We're
Well, we're not
working on
really
him.
sure. He's been diagnosed with some heart stuff. We're trying to figure
man.
out what that is, and we're doing some testing. So at this point, I think I always think he's just faking.
Right.
But apparently
Right.
the echogram and the MRI
Okay,
and
you got
6 or
some
7
data there.
doctors seem to. I'm still holding out for the fact that this kid is just doing this to test me.
Well, it's all somehow it turns around to be all about you. But on
It
the
is,
other
it
hand,
is.
I hope he's going to be okay. I'm sure we'll.
Well, I told him
keep
if he
in
doesn't
thoughts.
straighten up, I'm going to beat this out of him. I said, this
Well-
arrhythmia, I think I can, I'll show you.
Okay, the parenting courses they're not working out so well.
Actually, I think we talked about this in an earlier podcast, and I think that the one element that I've used to a great deal in being able to raise my son is shame. I think that
Okay, yeah.
it's called. I'm going to write a book, Shame-Based Parenting.
Shame-based parenting.
It's-
That one's been used throughout the centuries.
Well, I've
as a matter of
perfected it.
fact, I don't think you have to write the book. I think everybody knows that one already.
Well,
Maybe the how not to.
I
on
perfected
that.
it. I am. I'm. It's.
Well, I hope everything works out for the best for your son, and but you, on the other hand, are still working at Columbus State
Well,
University.
someone would argue whether what I do is actually working.
No one's
But
absolutely
I
been
show
able to.
up, and the taxpayers are actually paying my paycheck. So,
There is no evidence whatsoever to that actually occurring at any point
right.
in time.
All I know is taxpayer money is flowing toward me in a way that probably at some point someone's going to notice.
All right, so I don't know what to make of that, but we're happy to have you here today. So,
Could I
you
drink?
know,
Is this okay?
yeah,
Okay,
sure,
it's
sure,
good.
that's fine. And yeah, that's right. We're no longer at the university. You know, we've done a lot of podcasting and video casting.
About 4
and
years, I think.
a bunch of it, yeah,
Yeah.
even more in some cases. So,
Yeah.
but now we're in a private studio, so
That's nice.
we're putting some things together.
Yeah.
It's good to have you back in here, and you know, Got Therapy's been a show where we have really talked about all things mental health, and those kind of things are always of interest, and you know how people respond to others and what goes on in their lives,
Yeah.
and that's what we want
And
to look at. So I'm sure that you, no doubt, if you can get that ADHD under control, have found a topic or two for us to talk about today.
Well, here's what I think we should talk about. Now, there is a concept out there called FOMO.
Okay.
But and that's been done. And FOMO is a fear of missing out. Folks are literally that there's a compulsion, almost an addiction.
Fear of missing out.
Right.
FOMO. Okay, I got you.
And so
All
we
right.
notice as we become increasingly more wired and interconnected, you are far more aware of things that you're not doing. And social media, especially Facebook, can generate a feeling called FOMO.
Okay.
So the minute, and this has happened to me, I think I told this story once. When I
Right.
was younger, I said I always wanted to buy a house, and I wanted to have a pool that I could sit next to the pool and read a book. I don't
Okay.
like swimming in the pool. Water makes me nervous.
Right.
But I want to just sit next to the pool. And so
Okay.
there I am. I now have that house. It's got a pool. I'm sitting there and I'm reading.
Okay.
But
Dream come true.
well, you would think so. But then I turn on my phone. One of them. I got one of them smartphones. You got one of the smartphones?
I saw your phone. Is that you have to flip it and there's a crank on it?
yeah,
I'm not sure.
Mine has a cord and it's. But
The
so I turn
antenna.
this thing on. I look and I turn on the Facebooks. You got one of those Facebooks?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, so I got on the Facebooks, and the minute you do that, you realize that there are people doing cooler things than you. I got this friend named Ian who it was like in Sweden or something, you know.
Right,
There's a,
right.
You know, picture of him there cavorting with naked Swedish people, and I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm like,
On a fjord.
that's
some
right, yeah.
point,
That
too.
don't
So
talk
I'm
dirty.
sure. Yeah,
So
right.
for that brief moment, I am sucked away from the very dream that I've worked hard to attain, and
Right.
suddenly I'm feeling envy. I'm feeling I'm missing something, and this is a chronic condition. In
Okay.
this age of being wired and interconnectedness and social media, it is pervasive. We are hounded by this feeling of we could be doing something else, and now we're missing something.
It does seem to me that this is pervasive and that
Oh.
all of us have it, and all of a sudden we have it, whereas we didn't have it back some time ago. Is this about social media? Is this about that internet
you know,
we
there's,
hear,
and
or
I
the
can't think-
interweb we hear about?
I think that there's he's the physicist. What's his name? Asian dude, the physicist. I can't think of his name, but he has. I think it's him who had a theory that civilizations progress in stages, and we've suddenly hit a stage of rapid technological acceleration that is characterized by interconnectedness. So now it's not just a connection to your family or your community, but now the internet allows us to be connected and for information to move across nations.
Wow.
And so he says that this is the beginning of something. And if you ever watch Star Trek, there is this notion that suddenly there becomes a federation where all these different races and people are part of one giant thing. And he says this is what we're beginning to see.
Right.
So I think when you say we didn't have that back in the old days, in the old days we didn't have it like 20, I don't know how long Facebook's been around, but it's probably been about 20 years before this really caught on, right?
Right.
The thing, our smartphones were literally something you'd see on Star Trek. These are not, these devices have, so.
No, I remember we talked about the guys who went to the moon, and we have more computer power in our phones than
By
we have.
walking around, yeah, right. Good
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Well, even in the course of having these, like, I remember when a terabyte of information cost you like $4,000. Like, I remember I'm like, and now for like $10, you can have a terabyte that fits in the palm of your hand.
Right.
This is it terabyte or yeah, it's a terabyte.
It is terabyte,
It's a terabyte.
and you can lose those too. I've had those, and I don't know where they're going, but
And they
anyway,
just,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
You
so
can't-
all that information and also the connectedness between us around the globe, actually. So you can build an audience. One person can have a very large audience.
Like,
whereas
right,
before
there's the
now.
possibility that somewhere in the future, someone in Kazakhstan is going to hear this. And
Yes.
they're going to say things.
Well, that's as a matter of fact, that's the only place that we are actually broadcasting
there's a
to
couple,
right
yes.
now. So that
Got
makes
a
sense.
cousin.
That's got a cousin.
Actually, there's a guy in Kazakhstan saying, you know what, that's a first world country? Forget it. I mean, that's really what's going to happen. But
Well, yeah, and all of that is happening so quickly, and it's like a lot of other things that we've talked about over time, and that is we're not prepared for what is happening in those situations. We haven't had time to catch up.
well, our nervous system was built around, the arid plains. We have a nervous system that was built to do a certain thing, and now we've generated these technologies. And think of the earliest technologies we had. A spear, for instance, right?
Right.
And now we've gone from something that is in some ways accentuates our earliest wiring to something that now begins to take the place of. And so you're right. We are moving in a pace that our psyches, our nervous system is attempting to catch up. And I think that there
Yeah,
may
if I interrupt, you had a famous quote I remember from one of your
Was this one about
French
rat feces?
French philosophers, but no, it was
No,
not.
no.
As a matter of fact, it was about a crisis. That a crisis arises before we've had a chance to
That's right.
create it. Is
Yes,
that what you
yeah,
said?
trauma is something that arrives before you have a chance to create it. In a way, that is exactly what happens. I think Facebook affords a certain trauma, and there is that's where there's a sort of a second term here, and it's one that I'm beginning to hear more of, and that is not FOMO but JOMO.
JOMO. Okay, I was just getting the first one down. So
Okay, well,
what is
if,
this?
If
I'm thinking
FOMO is
about?
the fear of missing out, JOMO is the joy of missing out.
Oh,
So there is a
okay.
recoil.
Something's been turned here. We're getting
I think we're now beginning to sense that there is. You can see often memes of folks Netflix and chill, for instance.
yes.
These are all an ode to being able to step away from the flow of social media and this interconnectedness, and it's a form of recoil, I think.
So that's an interesting thing that we wanted to be connected. We wanted to be involved. Everybody wants all this information. We want to be on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and those social media platforms. But now that we're there, wait a second. What's happened to make people kind of pull back from this? Because I find that sort of a natural reaction to it.
Well, I've been listening to this guy, he's dead. There's a philosopher named Friedrich Hegel,
Yes.
and he invented Pop-Tarts? No, he didn't.
No, that's
Had
the other angle.
nothing to do. Yeah, it had nothing to do with Pop-Tarts. But he talks about how that there is a dialectic, and there is a movement, and there's a movement of the spirit of the age, and that each age has its own distinct spirit, and so the zeitgeist, as it were.
Right.
And if our current zeitgeist is sort of defined by this interconnectedness, then we'll see it move, and there'll be this dialectic. There'll be a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis as there's some sort of movement of information, and that the possibility of a mind that could grow. When I think of, there's this concept of digital natives, for instance. Like my
Right.
son is a digital native. Like I can literally tell him stories that, we played outside because we didn't have a computer.
Right.
And he's like, what sort of weird place did you come from? Where's the
How did that? Wait, you played outside? Oh
like,
yeah.
hey.
See, and the thing about it wasn't the toys you get; it was the boxes. It was those big boxes that you played in back in the day with the guy.
Yeah,
That took
that's
up
right.
all our
It's
time,
not,
But yeah, so it's re-education. It's bringing back history for.
To
son
him,
to
it's
try
like,
to figure
but
out.
he is a digital native, so the mind that is required for the new age doesn't require a Gutenberg mind, which is what you and I have.
Okay.
We grew up in a land of books. Information was shared. You shared another mind by someone writing something down and handing it to you. Or something. Certainly we had media, we had TV, and all that sort of stuff. But still, it was the zeitgeist was the Gutenberg mind. But now we live in a world of the interconnected, the digital mind. It's a different thing.
Yeah, and it's so fast. Everything happens so fast. So if there's a trauma somewhere, it's everywhere now. So you begin to pick up on it, has an effect on you as an individual. On the other hand, it's sort of good and bad news. We have this ability to connect with people, to build crowds, to build audience. If you've got something really positive to say, then more people can hear it, and almost at a moment's notice too. So.
Yeah, I find that I can share nude pictures with people far easier than I could before. I mean, it's just not,
Yeah, if you haven't learned that lesson, we'll have that on another show because somebody needs to kind of control what happens to
Actually,
with that camera.
Whenever I send nudes, somebody always replies, "You should see a doctor about that." That's really all I forget. That looks infected. That's really that's all I ever get.
Okay. All right, but so it's having an effect on it. And no, so are you saying the JOMO is pulling back from it? So I want my personal space. Does that mean we cut off the social media, we close the phone down, we go off of social media?
Well, I think if the battle cry of JOMO is Netflix and chill, in some way it may be simply a retreat into another form of media, or it could be a momentary retreat from said thing. I will say that there are all these folks who talk about, you'll see this with some mental health experts, this notion of taking a Facebook vacation, where you literally sort of, unplug. I wonder, though, if the folks who are doing that are those more with a Gutenberg mind. If they're, whereas, it's interesting because my son, for them, a big form of communication is not books but memes.
Right.
So whether it is Twitter or Snapchat or memes, you convey information in these bite-sized nuggets, usually laced with irony. In his case, irony and sarcasm.
Right.
And there's something interesting about that. Now, how that connects with JOMO, I'm not sure, but it could be a way to. Those of us who find ourselves lost to Facebook, maybe there's a natural break that comes with someone in his generation where they literally can save themselves by being pulled into and drowned in envy by just taking nothing serious. Maybe there's a price to pay for that too. I don't know.
Right. There may well be. I was thinking of Nicholas Carr's book on the shallows, where the internet has sort of changed our brain to some extent. It's his thesis, the idea that we're all, instead of reading the full book or reading the entire article, we skim it. We get little pieces of that. Then it comes down to something on Facebook. Then it comes down to Instagram. Then Twitter, and it's under 40 characters. And everything seems to be a soundbite now. I'm not sure where that's taking us.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if it's Carr said that, but those who are sort of proponents of this sort of movement would say, well, why not? Because you now have at your fingertips all this information. Why hold on to it?
Right.
Why, if the spear was a wonderful invention, one of our earliest technology, why would you go back to having to kill something with your hands?
Absolutely. It's really interesting, too, because I think part of this thesis is really what about the values? I mean, we've had this whole phenomenon of fake news, as we all kind of know about that now. And what is the truth? How do you disseminate what is actually true with the things that we see? Is that fake? They have this deep fake thing now where they can take your video, and they may take this video of you now as we're looking and put somebody else's face on it, or make you say something and use your words and your voice to say something completely different than you actually have said. So I guess the bigger point is that how do we know? How do we get this critical thinking up to a point?
That deep fake thing. I've been I've been watching nothing but adult videos where everybody's face is Steve Buscemi's. It's deep fake.
Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna let sometimes with this stuff, you've seen this over the years, but we let it settle down, and the dust comes down, and then we go on to something different. But
just saying that'll do things.
All right. But the point being that there is It's getting harder to tell, and who's influencing who, and is it the right thing, and what are about values? What's the right thing? Recently and this is in the last few days or week, Facebook and those folks, Twitter and so forth, have been taking people down because of hate speech and language and those kinds of things. I just wonder what you think about that as well in this scenario.
Well, it's interesting because there's this wonderful, I saw this on the Facebook, someone posted a meme, and it's a picture of two guys, and they're standing across from a number, and it's a big number written in the sand, and one of them says it's a 9, the other says it's a 6.
Oh.
And then it says down below, it says, you really need to think about other people's perspective because, you want to know where they're coming from and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
And then that sounds innocuous. It really does. However, whoever wrote that in the sand meant it to be a 6 or a 9. It literally can't be both. It has to be one of those things.
Right.
And so if you suddenly generate a space where all narratives are equally considered and all truths are necessarily important, I've often heard in New Age worldview that, everyone has to define their own truth. Well, then it isn't a truth. A truth on some level has to be universal. And so the worry, I think, is when you say these sorts of things is that we could lose the possibility of any sort of narrative to bind at all. And the only narrative that you might come up with is one that's laced in irony. So it's a distancing. Like when I hear my son talk about things, it's a way of avoiding the possibility of any sort of emotional or spiritual investment, and so that you can hover above everything in this sort of meta-narrative that's an ironic tone. So when I think that's a potential problem.
Well, it's there's a lot going on with this information age we're in and misinformation age as well. But people are getting very sophisticated in getting a fake message out or manipulating others and influencing others in this way. And I think our government obviously is aware of it and what they're doing about it. I'm not really sure. It gets into political issues and elections and other kinds of things. So I think there's a lot to consider in this, but are we just moving to a point where we can't believe anything that comes out, or we question everything, and what do we really know?
Well, maybe this is it certainly will be something that my son's generation will have to face. If you are flooded with information, if you have at your fingertips all sorts of knowledge, you're going to have to develop the sort of mind to parse it. You're going to have to develop a mind that can make the right sort of sense of things.
That makes sense.
And I think in our current political discourse, that's often both the left and the right take advantage of. They can generate a narrative that isn't focused necessarily on a solution. A good, wonderful example right now are some of the controversy over some of the abortion bills that are being floated, and in our state of Georgia and Alabama especially. And there is such a disconnect between both sides of this issue.
Right.
And if the goal were for both sides, for instance, that we were to decrease the number of abortions, if that were a goal, then both might agree on it, and then we would set toward being able to, how do we do this?
Right.
And if the concession, well, we have to make abortion safe and legal so that we can't do away with this, but let's then do this, then you have the possibility of being able to generate the possibility for some sort of change or movement. And I think in a lot of political discourse, there isn't anything like that. It's simply a matter of who shouts loudest. It's a zero-sum game.
Right, and I hadn't heard the word tribalism used in the way it's being used these days. So it's just one of those automatic things. And so what it becomes now is, which group are you in? And it almost seems to me like we're not really thinking, should we be in this group, and what are the consequences of being in this group?
Yeah. And let's just say that by accident I joined ISIS. Now, it's taken me a while to, because I didn't realize it's a little like those.
Out of all the things I've heard, that some reason it sends a chill up.
It's a little like, when you were a kid and you join one of those record club things and they keep sending you records.
Yeah.
And you can never get out of. That's what it's like joining ISIS.
Gym membership kind of a thing. Yes.
Once you join, it's really hard to get them to stop. They keep sending me brochures, but. I'm not sure I was going with that, but just I'm no
But
longer. a member.
first of all, I'm thinking of a brochure from ISIS.
That's,
I'm not
it's
sure what to make.
You say that was a lovely setting for a beheading. I'm gonna say I really
Yeah,
like.
so you're coming up with a jingle for
That's right,
ISIS brochure.
fine.
Okay, but what were we talking about again? So this happens.
Beheadings. No,
Okay.
it was,
No, but we find ourselves there. We're in this tribalism kind of thing where we're moving from group to group, and I think it's just too easy to take a side and stick with it, or buy an ideology that maybe you shouldn't be in. Maybe it doesn't fit with who you are and what's going on, but it feels good to be in a group. All right.
Well, when you mentioned that, because I was sort of joking about the ISIS thing, because who am I kidding? They wouldn't let me join. I wouldn't want to be.
I know for a fact that you would fail the admission.
Any group that would accept me is really not a group I
right.
want to be a part of.
I've heard that.
But the idea, like,
quote.
they were like, there were thousands of folks who were American citizens who joined ISIS.
Right.
And part of what ISIS, they offer you a certainty. They offer you a clear narrative, and in a way, it's not. It's an answer to FOMO, and fundamentalism and tribalism can be a reflexive answer to FOMO, and it's an answer we've been giving for most of our history, I imagine, but right now it may seem even more pertinent. And there are variants of ISIS. I think that our political tribalisms are a variant of that. There's a famous quote by the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who I like to quote a lot.
Yeah. Nothing here on the show different than the other times we've
That's
met
right,
about
Zizek.
Zizek. Right.
Well, Zizek would say that, you'll notice that there's never been an Amish terrorist. Just don't do it.
Okay, I don't have. I'm thinking. I'm going through my
and
thoughts.
You may say, well, that's because, like, what are they going to run over you with a horse cart?
A horse and buggy, right.
But no. The point would be is that true fundamentalism is a certainty that, if nothing else, it just makes you feel sorry for the other guy. There's no. So what tribalism, some of our political tribalisms, ISIS, all these sorts of things offer a symptomatic, and I mean symptom in a mental health sort of way, a way to answer the FOMO, and it is not a real answer.
Right.
No more than developing a heroin addiction is an answer to the fundamental ontological concerns you may have.
Right.
But the Amish or the Dalai Lama, or you could think of all sorts of religious organizations where they're not blowing things up because their narrative is such that it doesn't it affords on some level an answer that is both comforting, real, and has utility, and it keeps them from having to. There's no reason to blow anyone up.
Right. So it's buying into this ideology, religious or otherwise ideology. I'm kind of curious about the FOMO stuff, because you were saying that's a fear of missing out, but isn't this about anxiety of not being a part of a group, or some level of anxiety for the person, and would that lead to the treatment for that?
Well, you can think of two levels of anxiety. There's ontic and ontological anxiety.
Okay, you're going to have to run those by me.
So
one
an
more time.
ontic is like the sort of thing, like if you have a fear of if a dog bit you when you were 3 and now you have a fear of dogs.
Got it.
So ontic anxiety is much more a reflection of your own developmental experience, your everyday experience. So we can develop. I used to fly all the time, and then when I flew here to interview for this job at CSU, there was a really bad storm, and ever since then I've been a little nervous of flying. So that is an ontic anxiety,
Okay,
It's
I got it.
I have a story about how I'm afraid of nudity, but that's a different thing. We'll save that for a different. But ontological anxiety is much more. It is much more existential. It is a basic element of the human condition, and that is the very anxiety of existing. Death is an ontological anxiety.
Yes. So where does that fit with the FOMO? I mean, all I'm doing is I'm online, and there I see something. Your example of you're seeing your friend having a much better time than
Right.
you, and there you are in perfect circumstances by the pool,
By
reading
the
the
pool,
book. I
I'm
mean,
not wearing pants. I mean, this literally is everything I'd hoped and dreamed.
I don't know about the pants. Put the pants back on. That's
Put-
where I'm going with that. But but it
I have a
interferes with you.
fence nobody can see.
So is it some mechanism that we have to be aware of so that we're not losing every time we see someone else doing something more fun or
Well, this could be the
having a better
mental health
situation?
takeaway from this. This could be if we need to have a bit of self-help to this, some
Yeah.
way to think about this is that if we think about those two levels of anxiety, in some ways, they really coincide. What may be happening when I'm sitting there at the pool is our nervous systems attempt to be able to generate a what's called the euthymic window, and we try to be able to maintain a certain level of balance where you're not feeling too much or too little. And so you're trying, based on your genetic loading and your developmental history, our euthymic windows can be both, in context, they can be broader or narrow. So folks who are, quote, happy may have a broader euthymic window.
Okay.
But even as I'm sitting there by the pool, I'm having to navigate and mediate hunger, the need for elimination, all sorts of biological processes that directly and indirectly affect my psyche. And so we are always attempting to be able to maintain our equilibrium within that euthymic window. So even as I'm sitting there, the reason I picked the phone up may have been an attempt at some sort of balancing.
Okay.
Right? So the goal would be is how do we, and this is maybe something we can talk about in depth at another place, because something
Sure.
really interests me, the difference between emotional regulation and emotional modulation.
Ah, okay.
Emotional regulation, heroin, cutting, restricting food intake, those are all forms of emotional regulation. They regulate emotion. A healthy response is modulation. So what if, while I'm sitting there at the pool, I attempt to regulate by grabbing my phone and going on Facebook? I'm distracting myself from both my internal and my external surround in such a way that I'm not necessarily directly dealing with the things that I could deal with in the most healthy way. A modulation, as opposed to a regulatory activity, could be to simply take a breath and start to name and allow myself to experience in the moment the things that are going on, to listen to the sound of the pool, think about the sun as it hits me, to be able to look at my house and my pool, to think about where I've been, where I'm at, where I'm going. Those are moments of meeting with the here and now. It's a meeting with the now that you can find only in an act of modulation, and they're often missing in an act of regulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it too. The idea of modulation in music. Sometimes you're still in the same song, you just modulate to another key. So the verse and everything else, chorus, goes along with
You
it.
don't
So that's
suddenly
an
have
interesting concept.
to change. And with that act of modulation, it requires an immersion and a connection with the now. And there's another concept that maybe we could talk about another time. I think is really interesting, and it's called emotional granularity. And that often when we're when we're regulating an emotion, for instance, if you're cutting, for instance, if what you're attempting to regulate is an anxiety with a capital A. But when you're in a modulatory act, you can begin to granulate, and you can think about the complexity of the emotion you're experiencing. And you can, sort of like in music, it's the difference between the Ramones and Beethoven. One of them is broad, and it is blaring, and the other requires you to think, wait a minute, as opposed to just feeling anxiety, right now I have had a really long week, and I know that my way my character structure is, it is hard for me to hit the brake. When I'm anxious, I hit the gas. But I've been thinking a lot in my own personal life or in therapy or in whatever, that I'm beginning to think about how I can be more sophisticated and healthy in my use of the brake. And then when I think about that, I generate a here and now granular moment where I think about the complexity of who I am and where I am. And that may allow me to be alive, to have what's known as a lived moment,
Okay.
as opposed to something that I may be escaping from. So it's not just as opposed to answering a fear of missing out by doing something, I can allow myself to drop into the moment and into the now. And that's a skill to learn. That's one of the things people learn in therapy.
Right. I think, well, we certainly have talked about that a lot, and the idea, notion of mindfulness and being in the moment and probably being here as opposed to wherever else your thoughts may be. But I think it is a skill to learn, and we need that. I mean, there needs to be more of that. I'm really wondering, are people you see really tuned in to, in some novel I was reading, talking about situational awareness. Mm-hmm. Like in that moment of situational awareness, you kind of knowing where other people are, what's going on, where you are, how you're moving, and so forth, which I think is it's kind of a side definition of this mindfulness idea, sort of a sit rep, as they say in the military.
A sit rep.
Don't ask me.
See, that
could,
like
I hesitate to go there because it could be used in a dangerous way. So
I'll think about how to.
I do. But all right. So are people aware? That's a broad question, but I mean, really, are the people around you, the people that you see? Certainly, when you come up to someone and start talking to them, their focus is on you. But are you looking around, seeing people really being aware of the moment-to-moment
well, I
scenarios?
use an example that happened recently. I was in one of these CSU training things where we're going and we're all
university training. I remember that. Yes, go ahead. All right.
Well, you missed this one.
Thank you.
But and so we go in and I get there and we were all assigned places to seat, so I don't really know a lot of the folks at my table. And as I go and I sit down and I realize that all the other tables, people are talking and they seem to be having a good time, and I'm aware that, wait a minute, I'm not talking to anybody. I feel sort of lonely and detached, and I'm disconnected, and I'm like, and then my mind begins to try to do something with this feeling. So the emotion rises up, and then I begin to generate various narratives. Well, maybe that's because I got a bum table and people around me aren't good, or maybe it's me, I suck, maybe I've always been, I'm awkward, I'm weird. And so there's all these sorts of things.
Wow, you're really winding it up.
So I'm like really thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then I think to myself, wait a minute, hold on, let me take a breath, let me just lean into this. And I'm like, you're right, I am feeling this, and I'm a little tired. And then I realize that the reason my table isn't talking to me because I have my chair turned away from them. I literally have my back to them. And so
okay, wait. Let me see. All right, so you're in a large room with the round table. So, and if you're facing the speaker, you have to turn your back.
And I had turned my head, and so they're talking, and I'm like, why are they not talking to me? Wait a minute. So I simply and utterly moved my chair till I'm facing them, and then we all start to talk. But that's a wonderful example of how being in the moment and allowing yourself, and again, one of my favorite cats on the planet, Wilfred Bion, he always says the goal of therapy is not to stop suffering, to get people to suffer better. And if I had and by allowing myself to suffer a little better, I am kind of lonely, this does suck. I can then come up with, wait a minute, I'm turned away from them. And then suddenly I am connected with them in a way and things move smoothly. You know.
All right,
Not for them, by the way, because suddenly they have to deal with me.
Yeah,
their lives
I was going to say they probably wish you kept that chair turned away a little longer before things began to happen. But I totally get that. Well, it is this critical thinking. It is awareness, and so people have to spend some time with that. I mean, I think that's some of the goal of therapy too. I guess beyond is saying this. Similarly, what I'm trying to say, basically, this notion that you have an awareness, and then you give yourself the option to choose and make things different, as opposed to running sort of with a thought process that just kind of leads you out to to where you don't want to go. For example, in social media, when you see those things up there and you see other people having this wonderful time, aren't those pictures of Instagram? Everybody's having the best time in the world. I mean, how is that? I've never had those that much
showing
time.
the stomach virus he may have picked up on this. It wasn't him laying in the fetal position and going, yeah, oh, you won't believe what happened. So there is a selective thing. But there's also, and one of my there's a Melanie Klein, who's a famous, probably the mother of object relations. She says that the only way through suffering is gratitude. And so if there is the capacity, and she charts a progress that you have to first own your own envy, and she thinks envy is central to our existence, and that we are often angry and full of envy and rage regarding the people around us, and that if we can own that, if we can name it, then we have the possibility of being kind enough to ourselves to forgive ourselves for having such emotions.
Right.
And then we have the possibility of then being able to lean into others. And then I could literally say to my friend, Ian, it's really cool that he's able to do these things. I know growing up with him, he always talked to me about how he wanted to travel. And for him, this was really important. And just like I always wanted a pool to sit by, now he gets to travel. Isn't it wonderful that both of us have been able to move forward in life and do these things?
Yeah, it seems that we don't appreciate at times because we're overwhelmed by this anxiety or not fitting in, or someone's got something as a better situation and things are happening. So it's modulation, as you said.
Well, and now notice that the modulation requires a dance between thought and feeling. It requires... There's a theorist by the name of Alan Shore, and he says it requires a bihemispheric moment. And what that means is he sort of thinks about it in terms of left and right hemispheric processing, which is kind of controversial among neuroscientists, but he embraces it. And there's this notion that there's a dance between thought and feeling. And it requires you to exercise those muscles. It requires you to think about them. And this may be something to talk about in a different podcast.
Sure.
I really I've been listening to a lot of, it's called Record Review on BBC, and it's where someone will, they'll take Beethoven's piano trio, Opus 1, that was the first thing he ever did, and I think there are three trios that he did, and they'll talk about them, and they'll play different recordings and different interpretations of them, and talk about the ones they like best, and it's a piece of music that they're talking about in a way as if it has the sort of complexity that your own emotional states have.
Okay.
And so I like the idea about thinking about music and listening to the world like it is a piece of music and being able to lean into it and think about it aesthetically. There's a thing called the aesthetic turn in psychoanalytic thought.
Okay.
And that's where we begin to think about our own inner world, the experiences we have with others and other people in a way like a work of art. We allow them that level of complexity so we can move in them, and we can name them, and we can have that a level of complexity that borders on a controlled chaos. And then when we do that, we can move from envy to forgiveness of self, to gratitude, to an admiration of other. And it requires a movement, and it is in some ways the opposite of what happens when someone reflexively answers FOMO. And maybe even when someone reflexively answers with JOMO. That if someone said to me that they had a joy of missing out because the moment they're in is beautiful, and they're able to see the complexity and to be alive in that moment, then that is true joy. But my worry is if JOMO meant Netflix and chill, it may just simply be a retreat into a different medium as a way to titrate and regulate as opposed to modulate. Be my thought.
No, I think you've got a good point there, and I'm not sure where this comes from in some way, the anxiety of not fitting in or missing out on something, and is that part of some I don't know, sort of narcissistic trend toward that we have to be, and we're exposed to this on social media so much that we have to be the center of attention, or we have to be the model that we see out there on Instagram and all of those things. We have to sort of live up to these unrealistic expectations, and in some way we're telling ourselves we're failing if we don't live up to that.
And notice how what you're describing is really one of the, it's ontological and not ontic. It is part of the human condition. All of us have that euthymic window that we move back and forth from. And it is not a flat line. You know, Freud's famous statement, the only anxiety-free state is death. And when you are a cadaver, you have neither FOMO nor JOMO. You've got, like, I don't know, oh no.
Oh no.
I don't know what you got. What you got? But
Well, we just introduced a new term,
Yeah,
and that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
But your one of the ways to define if there's such a thing as mental health is the capacity for being able to answer that in a way that is, for lack of a better word, allows you to stay alive. One of my favorite quotes from Donald Winnicott is, it's his prayer, "Lord, let me be alive when I die." And that we are so often pulled out of aliveness. We are made zombie in so many ways.
All right, there's a lot to think about, and some of the things that you've talked about today. And I have to go back and listen to this because I think there's some topics that we need to go further.
Good, yes.
We brought up today.
Steve Buscemi.
I was going to pass on that one.
That's not a,
Steve Buscemi. All right,
Yeah.
there's a great character right there.
He is,
All right,
he is.
so so FOMO, JOMO debunked.
Or maybe the way to think about that is that, and this is where I'm going to be Hegelian about it, that we offer an antithesis to this notion of FOMO and JOMO with the hope that we can generate a synthesis that moves us forward.
I'm not sure why, but I think we might have been disconnected
What do you think?
from the internet. No, I think we're back. All right,
Okay.
so what do I know? Anyway, that there was a little disruption there. Does that sound like a storm or
It
some
is
rain?
right now.
Is
It is storming badly. It
Okay.
Sounds
All right.
like.
We're in a nice, safe brick building. It's been
I hope
here
I put
since.
the top of my car up.
Oh,
That's all I'm
you're
on.
that convertible now is your swimming pool, and
Yes.
you can put a chair next to that and read your book.
Yes,
By the way, okay. So, all right. Any last thoughts about this? I mean, what would be your advice? Let's just get to that. So we want to try to help some people
How about
maybe
this?
watching. So,
Life-
what can we tell them?
Life takes practice. I think that should be the basics takeaway. That moments of joy and non-joy and suffering, those are all moments in which we can be more alive. And if we go back to that statement that Bion said, that we have to get better at suffering, and we may also need to to get better at joy too. But it is practice, and one of the things this happens in therapy. It's a place to practice. It's a place to be in a way that you normally wouldn't be. But you don't have to do this just in therapy. You can do this with friends and family, as long as you allow yourself to have a little level of self-reflection, the capacity to be able to lean into your experience in those moments and just sort of give them a name, to dance with them a little. Maybe that's something we can talk about more when this guy Alan Shore is really interesting in this notion of the euthymic window. That could be something to talk about too.
Yeah, if I heard that right, euthymic window is something that helps us regulate and modulate what's going on. We need to stay within that window. That's a good window to be at.
Well, you can
is
think of, and when
understand.
we have a chance to talk about this, there's like if you go to see a horror film, you're wanting that to bring you at the edge of your euthymic window. You want to be scared, so you literally, it's a controlled anxiety. Lots of folks can't deal with horror movies, so their euthymic window is a little narrow at the top.
Right.
It's set lower down the whereas some folks are that's what they really enjoy. And
Well, it's a phenomenon. There are, and I know people that we go to this show with on a regular basis, and it's a horror movie, I'm not going.
That's right,
And
yeah.
that's it. They can't handle that, right? Whereas other people are kind of coming in having the best time of their lives. What's going on there? That might be another topic.
This sounds like
another
my
day.
wedding night. That's all I gotta say.
I have no doubt we'll hear more about that in the.
I got a video
episodes to
too if you
come.
want to see.
Yeah, no, please.
Much.
Let's keep all videos contained.
Steve Buscemi's in it, by the way. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
listen, I don't know about what happened there, but the fact that you were married, that's one of those other
It
phenomena.
really
We're
is.
not sure
Well,
what
let's
happened.
just say that
There-
that there are women out there whose expectations can be easily lowered. Let's just say.
Well, yes, and that might be a good place to end today. All right, Dr. Rose, thank you so much.
Sweet.
I'm going to call you Dan because you're now on this new podcast coming out, and we're going to put it around and continue to do this. Look forward to talking with you next on the next
Let's do
topic.
it. There's this notion of the black pill. This is the notion that you wake up and that everything is crap, and it's a form of nihilism. It's the idea that when you really see how things are, you say, there's a philosopher, what's his name? I'll think of his name, but he was partly inspiration for the TV series True Detective, the first season.
Okay.
If you ever saw that.
Yeah.
But he is he's an antinatalist, and an antinatalist is someone who doesn't believe that human beings should reproduce. We should just die out. And he has a nihilist philosophy in which he sort of sees the human race as like a bacteria. We've infected the planet, and at some point it'll develop the right sort of antibodies and we'll all be gone. And so that is sort of a form of the black pill. Sort of like you see things and boom, everything is horrible, and so you have the potential to succumb to nihilism.
Right. Got it.
There's also a white pill, and the white pill would be the ability to, that would be religion, or in fact some evangelical folks call it the white pill, that you suddenly see that there is, wait a minute, there's God, and so that there is redemption, or there is something better outside of all this and whatnot. And the point of bringing up any of those sorts of pills is that each of them represent a way of being able to dance and deal with reality.
Right.
And all of them may have a shortcoming, or they offer some sort of solution. And they have a parallel, I think, in some of the things you and I have been talking about here in terms of how do people engage with themselves and the world in such a way that, I don't want to use the word happy, because that's a pill in of itself. As an aside, there's a famous philosopher, Alain Badiou, and he calls it the happiness industrial complex.
Oh, okay.
And that part of what drives, if there were a happiness pill, for instance, it comes in the form of, he uses, Zizek talks about this too, of Western Buddhism, that we all need to start buying meditation apps and doing yoga, don't do yoga.
Don't do it.
But,
No, I got you, though.
There's a couple of jokes in there. I'm not going to go in there.
I know.
But
it's good that you can hit on it and then go back to the topic.
That's because I woke up at 4 this morning. I'm tired. That's the only reason. But
yes.
So the idea that where was I at with this thing? Oh, it was the yoga, or and all this sort of stuff, and meditation, and all those are a form of either the black or the blue or the red pill. They could be the blue pill because they allow you to become better consumers, better cogs in the machine of capitalism, without ever really questioning things. Like, for instance, again, why do we need to meditate more? the things that you feel, the fact that you can't sleep, or the fact that you're always anxious, maybe something you need to know as opposed to being numbed from. And the goal would be, how do we engage with ourselves? That would be a wonderful example of that there is an engagement with your own suffering in such a way that may inform you maybe how to change your life, may be able to inform you on how to be able to make the lives of others better. But none of those are the sort of pills that offer a fix that either give you numb you into sleeping or give you a false sense of being awake.
himself to a tree so when the hurricane hit, he could stand it. And they said, and it wasn't the winds of the hurricane that got him, it's the Volvo that was in the wind. Chitwood's column?
What did he say?
He was saying, it's not you can handle going across the water, it's the stuff going down the water that's going to take you out, something like that.
Well, you mentioned self-psychology because, you know, the way self-psychology talks about this is that the self is sort of a, it is something, you can sort of define we have to define the self. And from a self-psychological perspective, there is the brain, and then there's the mind. And the mind is an emergent property of the brain.
Okay.
And the self is a system that it's an emergent property of the mind in context with other selves. So there are sort of layers to this. When you talk
Right.
about self from a self-psychological perspective, it is in the self system requires constant maintenance. We have to be able to do something with ourself. We have to maintain. Coat talked about it has to have rigor. It has to stay cohesive.
Right.
And so there are all these ways that we manage our self states to maintain some level of cohesion. And sometimes to manage those self states, we have to be selfish. And that's
Right.
when we are using the people around us to help us as self objects. They can serve different purposes. There are what he called mirror self objects, where people will reflect back to us things that we need to see. Idealized self objects. People we have to look up to. They need to be ideals that we move toward. Twinship, where we can see that we have a lot in common. There are a couple of others too, but these are all ways in which we can sort of make use of the people around us to maintain some form of self-cohesion, to feel, and cohesion can be defined as a sense of who you are across time.
Okay.
Right?
Some consistency of who we
Right,
are.
yeah.
So we wake up in the morning, we know about our history, who we were
Right,
before.
we can feel, and that throughout the day we're often generated what are known as not me states. Parts of us that are parts of us, but we're, Lacan would call them extimate. They are part of us, but they feel external or they feel alien to who we are. And so those also have to be managed. And they're often managed through projection or projective introjection, you don't want to acknowledge some of your own anger, instead you'll see it in the eyes of someone else. And that's a way of also managing this self-system.
Leaning in, what is that?
Well, it's a way of sort of allowing yourself to be able to be in the presence of the thing you're feeling. So when you lean in, you cultivate a certain, you're sort of observing and allowing yourself to experience what's happening with you. And you do that with other people. Like, it's often easy to illustrate this, what not leaning in would be. Let's say you're sitting at home, you took the day off, you're laying on the sitting on the couch in your underwear watching some Andy Griffith,
Okay.
or some The View. I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of that show. So
Okay.
you're watching The View, and your
It's
wife
news to me,
comes
but
in,
go.
and she notices that you have done nothing, but you've been sitting on it. And she comes in, and she starts to get angry. She gets angry. She yells at you.
Right.
Okay. If you begin yelling back, that would be an example of not leaning in. But if
Not-
you allowed yourself to take a breath and you lean in, you might say, wait a minute, my wife's had a long day. She may have come in and had seen my leisure, my Uber leisure activities may have triggered some things in her. There may be, by leaning in, I can help name exactly what she's experiencing, and I might be able to be present for her in a way that I wasn't before. You can do the same for yourself. If for instance, I woke up this morning not in the best mood.
Okay.
I wasn't. I was
Sorry to hear
a
that,
little
actually.
cranky. I was
Yes,
a little
well,
cranky.
it happens
you know.
to us all.
I blame Ivanka Trump. But,
Okay. Here we go.
but as an aside, this is one of the
Yes.
things I've been thinking about too. Like, am I wrong? But do one of Trump's sons look like the guy from American Psycho? Such as me,